In the fall of 1983, a convoy of trucks drove into the desert outside Alamogordo, New Mexico, and buried a company's own products in the ground. Not a few boxes. Hundreds of thousands of cartridges, game consoles, whole pallets of unsold inventory, crushed flat and dumped into a landfill cell, then sealed under a layer of concrete so nobody could pull them back out. The company paid to make its own products vanish. And here is the part that should stop you. 1 year earlier, that same company had been, by many accounts, the fastest growing business in the history of the country. $2 billion in sales. 70% of its parent corporation's entire income. The name on those buried cartridges had, for a little while, simply meant video games. It was Atari. And it was burying itself in the sand. That should be the whole story. A giant that got greedy, made a bad game, and collapsed, filed under cautionary tale and forgotten. The trouble is that the bad game did not kill Atari, and neither did the crash that followed. The real story starts 4 years before the desert, in a meeting room in California, with a sentence a man in a suit said to 4 of his own programmers. He told them anybody could do a cartridge. He was wrong in a way that would take a $2 billion company apart, board by board, and leave the pieces in a hole in New Mexico. Every week we tell the story of a company that built something the world loved, then destroyed the people who trusted it. If that is your kind of story, the like and the subscribe keep them coming. To see how far there was to fall, start in a rented office in Sunnyvale, California, in the summer of 1972. 2 engineers, Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney, put down a few $100s between them and started a company to build coin-operated games. They needed a name. Bushnell liked an old board game called Go, and he took a word from it, a term for the moment when a stone sits 1 move away from being captured. He called the company Atari. Their first machine was a table tennis game built from a black and white television set, and a coin slot with a milk carton wedged inside to catch the quarters. They put it in a bar down the street to see if anyone would play. A few days later, the bar called to say the machine was broken. It was not broken. The coin box was jammed solid with quarters, more than it could hold. That machine was Pong, and it was pulling in $400 a week out of a single tavern. Atari had found a hunger nobody had measured yet. The arcade money was real, but the future sat in the living room. In 1975, Atari squeezed Pong onto a single chip and sold it as a home console through the Sears catalog. And it flew off the shelves that Christmas, with customers lined up outside the stores waiting for the next shipment. It was the first hard proof that the whole country wanted to play. The real bet came 2 years after that. In 1977, Atari shipped a home machine called the Video Computer System, later known by its model number, the 2600. It launched at $199, and its whole trick was the cartridge. The console did nothing on its own. You bought the game separately, slid one into the slot, and the same plastic box became 100 different machines. It started slow. Then, in 1980, Atari put the arcade smash Space Invaders onto a cartridge, the first time an arcade hit had come home, and the 2600 stopped being a toy and became the thing every child in America wanted under the television. Sales quadrupled in a year. Over its life, the machine would sell more than 30 million units. And the games that made it sing were written by a small group of young programmers who treated the work like an art form, because that is what it was. Atari had grown too fast to stay independent. In 1976, Bushnell sold the company to Warner Communications, the New York media giant, for around $28 million. For a while, the founder and the corporation coexisted. Then, in 1978, Warner pushed Bushnell out of the company he had built. Unhappy with a founder who spent his afternoons on a pizza and arcade chain and ran Atari like a playground. In his place, Warner installed a professional, an executive named Ray Kassar, who had spent his entire career in the textile trade, selling towels and bedsheets. The California offices ran on the culture of the counterculture, programmers in their 20s, no dress code. Work that felt like a party. Kassar arrived in a tailored suit and saw a company that needed discipline. And he made no secret of what he thought of the talent, telling the programmers to their faces that they were no more important than the workers on the assembly line who snapped the cartridges together. And under his discipline, the numbers went vertical. Atari climbed from roughly $100 million in sales to over $2 billion in 4 years, the fastest corporate growth the country had ever recorded, throwing off 70 cents of every dollar Warner earned. On paper, it was a triumph. Underneath, a factory of artists was being run by a man who saw the games as product, and the people who made them as line workers. The break came over a simple request. In 1979, 4 of Atari's best programmers, the men behind some of its biggest sellers, went to Kassar and asked to be treated the way Warner treated its recording artists and its film stars. Royalties on the games they wrote. Their names on the boxes. Kassar's answer became the most expensive sentence in the company's history. He called them towel designers. He told them anybody could do a cartridge. So the 4 of them, David Crane, Larry Kaplan, Alan Miller, and Bob Whitehead, walked out, and that October they started their own company to prove him wrong. They called it Activision, and it was the first business on Earth to make games for a console it did not build. They put their names on the boxes. One of them, a jungle adventure called Pitfall, sold more than 4 million copies, and became one of the best-selling cartridges the machine ever had, and it did not carry Atari's name anywhere on it. And they proved, in the cruelest possible way, that Kassar had been right about one thing. Anybody could do a cartridge. Including everybody. That was the wound that would not close. Atari sued to shut them down and lost. And the settlement made the third-party model legal for good. Now anyone could make a game for Atari's machine. And everyone tried. Dozens of companies appeared overnight. Most of them with no talent and no patience, racing to stamp out cartridges for a console that had sold in the tens of millions. The shelves filled. A parent walking into a store in 1982 faced a wall of hundreds of games with no way to tell the good from the garbage, and most of it was garbage. Atari had built the market. It no longer controlled it. Management's answer to the chaos was not better games. It was new hardware, a successor console called the 5200, and it landed with a thud. Incompatible with the old cartridges and rejected by the buyers. The company was solving the wrong problem, and the bill was about to come due in 2 disasters wearing Atari's own name. The first was Pac-Man. The arcade version was the most popular game on the planet, a genuine national craze, and the home port was the most anticipated cartridge Atari had ever made. What shipped was rushed and ugly, the ghosts flickering, the maze wrong, nothing like the machine people crowded around in the arcade. To the accountants, it did not matter. Atari manufactured 12 million cartridges, more copies than there were consoles to play them on, betting the name alone would move them. Around 7 million did. Millions more sat dead in warehouses. The second disaster had a movie attached. Atari paid as much as $25 million for the rights to make a game out of Steven Spielberg's E.T., a record price for a license. And then handed a single programmer roughly 5 weeks to build the whole thing before Christmas. 5 weeks. He was one of Atari's most talented people, the man behind 2 of its best-regarded games, and even he could not conjure a world in a month. As the story goes, Spielberg looked at the plan and asked why he could not just do something simple. Like Pac-Man, the result is still voted the worst video game ever made. A maze of pits the player fell into and could barely climb back out of. Atari pressed 4 million copies. Around 3.5 million of them came back, returned by stores and disgusted customers. The magic that had built the company was gone, traded away for a release date. Then, the whole thing came down at once. In 1982, the American video game business was worth $3.2 billion. By 1985, it was worth around $100 million. That is a collapse of 97% in 3 years, and it happened so fast that in Japan they still call it the Atari shock. Cartridges that had sold for $35 were dumped into bargain bins at $5, then $1, then given away, and still nobody wanted them. Retailers who had ordered walls of them shipped everything back and refused to stock more. Atari lost $536 million in a single year, a loss heavy enough to drag its parent company's stock down with it. The industry Atari had invented nearly died in the crib, and Atari was the name stamped on the wreckage. Which brings the trucks back to the desert. In September of 1983, with warehouses full of product nobody would buy, Atari quietly arranged with a landfill in Alamogordo to make the evidence disappear. Truckload after truckload of cartridges and consoles, crushed and buried and capped with concrete. For 30 years, the company let it live as a rumor, a story too neat to be true. And gaming argued about whether it had happened at all. Then, on the 26th of April, 2014, a film crew and a team of archaeologists put a backhoe into that ground, and the desert gave the cartridges back. More than 1,300 of them came up out of the dirt, copies of E.T. among them, exactly where the company had left them. The dig became a documentary, and grown adults stood at the lip of a landfill and cheered as a backhoe pulled the proof out of the earth. The city of Alamogordo sold some of the recovered cartridges to collectors and sent others to museums, including one to the Smithsonian. 30 years of denial, answered by a hole in the ground. The desert had kept the receipt for the single worst year in the history of play. Warner had seen enough. The parent company that had ridden Atari to $2 billion now could not offload it fast enough. It broke the company into pieces, kept the arcade business for itself, and went looking for anyone willing to take the rest. The home consoles and the computer division, off its hands. A buyer was coming. And of all the people on Earth who might have walked through that door, the one who did was carrying a grudge against a company you already know. 7 months earlier, a man had been told goodbye in a boardroom and had walked out of the company he had spent 30 years building into the best-selling computer on the planet. His name was Jack Tramiel, and the company he had lost was Commodore. How he lost it is its own story, and we have told it. What matters here is where he went next. On the 1st of July, 1984, close to midnight, Tramiel bought Atari's consumer and computer divisions from Warner for $50 in cash and $240 million in promises to pay later, handing Warner a slice of his new company in return. He had put the deal together in near secret, so quietly that Atari's own senior managers found out they had been sold only after the papers were signed. The man who had just lost one empire had picked up the corpse of its greatest rival for pocket change. And his first move was to point it, like a weapon, at the company that had thrown him out. Here is where the two stories collide. Before Warner sold, Atari had lent a small California startup called Amiga $500,000. And in return, Amiga was to deliver a revolutionary graphics chipset by the end of June. The deadline came. Instead of handing the technology to Atari, Amiga sold itself to Commodore. And Commodore wrote a check to pay the $500,000 back and cancel the deal. So the future that should have belonged to Atari walked straight into the arms of Tramiel's old company. He answered the only way he knew how. On the 13th of August, 1984, Tramiel sued, trying to block Commodore from ever shipping a machine built on that chipset. The mass-market computer war he had started inside Commodore, he now fought from inside Atari against Commodore. Two companies he had run, aimed at each other, by one man at war with his own past. The lawsuit ground on for years before it quietly settled. Tramiel ran Atari the way he had run Commodore. Cut every cost, ship cheap, move fast. He rushed out a sleek new computer, the Atari ST, in 1985 at $799 and shoved it onto shelves ahead of Commodore's Amiga, which stumbled to market late and priced high. For a moment, the exile was winning his private war. The ST found a real audience, especially across Europe, where musicians discovered it shipped with the ports to run a whole recording studio straight out of the box. and it quietly became the machine that a generation of electronic music was made on. But it ran the same playbook that had hollowed out Commodore, and it hit the same wall. The beige IBM-compatible PC took the offices. The Macintosh took the designers. And a Japanese company, launching the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985, rebuilt the console market Atari had burned to the ground, on rules written specifically to avoid Atari's mistakes. After that, Atari spent a decade shrinking. It threw one last punch in 1993, a console called the Jaguar that it sold as the world's first 64-bit machine, and it failed so completely, fewer than 250,000 ever sold, that the name became a punchline. By the middle of the 90s, Atari was too small to matter. And in 1996, it did not so much go bankrupt as evaporate. It folded itself into a struggling disk drive maker called JTS in a paper merger. And the name that had once meant video games disappeared inside a company nobody remembers. 2 years later, JTS sold the Atari name to the toy company Hasbro for $5 million, a rounding error against the $2 billion the company had once earned in a single year. From there, the name crossed the ocean. A French software publisher called Infogrames bought the rights, and in time renamed itself Atari, because the dead brand was worth more than its own living one. Today, Atari is a stock ticker in Paris, a logo licensed onto retro boxes and t-shirts, owned by people who were children when the trucks drove into the desert. So what killed Atari? It was never one bad game. E.T. did not do it, and The Crash did not do it, and Jack Tramiel did not do it. Those were symptoms. What broke was the respect, and it broke from the top. The day a company that ran on the talent of a few young artists decided those artists were interchangeable, that anybody could do a cartridge, that the magic was the product, and not the people who made it. That contempt walked 4 of them out the door and turned them into a rival. It flooded the shelves with junk that anyone could make. It rushed the games that buried the brand. Every fatal wound was self-inflicted, and every one of them landed on somebody who had trusted the name on the box. Anybody could do a cartridge. By 1983, everybody did, and the pile of them filled a hole in the desert. Somewhere under a repaved lot in Alamogordo, and behind glass in a museum in Washington, sits a cracked plastic cartridge with a small alien on the label, the most famous failure in the history of play. The men who ran Atari into that desert are long gone. The name they treated as furniture outlived every one of them, and today it sells on a stock exchange an ocean away, a promise rented out to strangers. A machine can be crushed and buried and paved over. A name, it turns out, is harder to kill than the people who owned it ever understood. There is another ghost from that same era worth more dead than alive. A computer that showed up in a box painted like a dairy cow, in more American homes than anyone will admit, until it drove itself off a cliff chasing the rival it should have beaten. That story is next. And if you had a 2600 under the television, tell me the first game you ever loaded into it. I read everything.